I guess where am I is the true question around here. Avoid and avoid? A hole in time and space. The white space in between videos? The darkness within darkness? No, that's stupid. Well, there has to be something I could do about it. And like snapping my fingers is going to fix this mess. Okay. This will do. Now what else can I do? Again, okay. Slightly better, but is that it? But on what? Oh. Alrighty then. Anyone who has ever played D&D can tell you that managing the power of characters can be a daunting task. It can be very tempting for a player to make an overpowered character to be the best one in the campaign, finding skills and spells that combo together that make them unconquerable. But while they become killing machines, that probably end up being murder hopos later. The DM is probably cursing themselves for letting them get that strong in the first place. This is the same reaction that a writer has when they realize they made a character overpowered. Only this time it's their own fault rather than some player. Let's be real, as soon as you introduce powers of any kind, you're going to have the problem of power creep. Power creep is a trope that has been named in anime but has crossed over into different things. It actually originated from video games and card games, but that is debatable for this situation and ultimately doesn't matter. An example of this is any card that had this one ability that gets invalidated by a new card with a stronger ability, like making one character have a debuff while this new one has the same cost, but does it to the entire board. But before we get into the problem of too much power, let's get into how you categorize power in the story in the first place. The magic system. A magic system is a method of basically listing and keeping track of what a person can do in your world, mostly in the sense of powers and special abilities. And what says that a waterbender can only bend water and not fire in the Avatar universe. Unless they're the Avatar, of course. This method is also not exclusive to a fantasy setting. It is just called that for simplicity. This can also be used for a world that has any sort of special ability or power. So like metahumans, mutants, or just very good fighters, martial artists, I don't know, whatever powers that Batman could have. A magic system is a writer's tool to combat power creep in their stories, especially if the writer is writing a story mostly based around combat or action. Though that does not mean that other stories are able to ignore it. Even if they have little fighting or focus on other aspects such as themes or character growth, the threat of power creep can invalidate either one of these. An example of this kind of problem in a story without much combat is making a character too hyper competent, especially in one where there's multiple characters that the story is putting heavy focus on and character development time for. If you make one of them hyper competent without much, explanation in the story or use in the story, make it so you invalidate the other characters and therefore make the audience ask, okay, why are we not talking about the competent one now? In my opinion, there are several abilities that can cause a story to have a overpowered character or cause major power creep on the offset, or whenever they're introduced into a story suddenly. And break the story. Let's go by them one by one. First one, resurrection. Any story you want death to matter needs the ability to kill characters without the audience going, why are they using the resurrection thing? This one can be a power if the character has a healer or has an item that can bring back people. Otherwise, when resurrection is used in any capacity, you essentially break death in your world. Take for example, death in comics. No one believes a death in superhero media. It is assumed they will come back at some point, usually within 6 months or more real time. After Superman came back after his death, the floodgates of superhero resurrection were open. Before the death of Superman, it was actually quite rare for someone to come back officially in comics. Usually it was some kind of one-off thing, a what-if story, a robot, a duplicate. Usually that was coming back to life to kill them because they thought the new guy that took over for them wasn't the one responsible for their death. But usually they will be dead again by the end of the story they were reintroduced in. There used to be the Untouchables of comic resurrections. Batman's parents, Bucky Barnes, who is now the Winter Soldier, Jason Todd, Uncle Ben. All but 2 of them have been resurrected since then. Keeping this from being a problem in your story is simple enough. Making death permanent for one is an easy way of sidestepping this problem, or making it so resurrecting somebody is untenable or costly in some way. It can be as simple as giving resurrection a price of some kind, like you need to kill 100 people to bring back one person you want. Maybe they can come back wrong, or they're not the same person but a spirit that took the place of the old soul. Or just Fullmetal Alchemist that bitch and say it's impossible, no caveats, no equivalent price or way to trick the system of life and death. The ability to travel through time, it could be the basis of an entire story. If it's not about that, then having time traveling as an ability in your story can be a death sentence to any form of continuity. It's one of those concepts that can turn off an audience by the mere mention of it if it's not the entire premise. It can be a dirty word in writing is what I'm saying. Like love triangles. This one is something I can't recommend using in any capacity unless you know what you're getting into. Time travel becomes a confusing mess even with the simplest of rules. The logical errors will either confuse you into submission or the audience. Either way, the best method to deal with it is to avoid it. Don't give anyone this ability or a method of time traveling. Or else you get the question, why aren't they using the time turns to solve Voldemort? Or the eternal question, killing baby Hitler in the crib. The reason you don't want your audience asking stuff like that when you introduce something like that is because he puts any situation on thin ice. What's to stop the character from changing time if it doesn't suit them? To go back in time and stop whatever went wrong in their life. You can make them the Paragon type that doesn't change because it shouldn't be changed, but that doesn't work so well with audiences. Especially in today's audiences where they're more cynical. It's like saying there's a god of justice in your world. Unless they're the hands-off type or the characters have no way of communicating with it, it makes anything they really do into question because why isn't this thing in use? It's why time travel is a dirty word. If you make it so you can validate anything that can happen, why bother let anything happen? Speaking of the future, let's talk about precognition. The ability to see the future is similarly very hard to do right, given that many plots require the characters and more importantly the audience to not know what's going on at first. Withholding information can be a very useful tool if you want to create suspense, or just reframe the rest of the story from a different perspective. So giving the character the ability to read the future with no trouble and clarity is going to be a very spicy option that might burn you in the end if you don't temper it. Especially since it takes away all the surprise. It's one of the few powers on this list that can actually be used satisfactory if you know what you're doing. At least a lot more than resurrection and time traveling. Because this can be things like the vague dream in the beginning of many fantasy stories, or just the prophecy, even though chosen ones have become a dirty word also. And also there can be some angst that you can mine from the accompanying prophecy from the audience in spite of the character. But that might come back to bite you because the audience usually doesn't like when any character whines. But going back to general power creep, there are many ways to fall into a trap with this one. In many shows or movies or books about fighting, an easy way to make your character more powerful is transformations or general power-ups. The problem from that leads into power creep is the idea of always giving them a power up when they always face a problem. Basically meaning that every fight is just, okay, what color is their hair gonna be now? This could be a domino effect where you also need to make the villain more powerful than the hero, and then you give the hero another power up that goes round and round and round. The feedback loop is again more common in the stories that put emphasis into fighting, superhero, shonen anime, or even sci-fi. An example of this is in the show The Legend of Korra. While having action, yes, and a lot of fighting, a variable list of Nickelodeon's poor decisions caused the show to be less focused than its predecessor, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Over the course of Legend of Korra, shortened to LOC for simplicity's sake, the narrative became more and more unfocused on the general story and more on the personal journey of Korra, learning to be her own type of avatar. And given the problems the studio uncaringly gave to the show, it ended up being, well, having a lot of shortfalls in many other aspects that its predecessor did very well. But for this video, we will focus on the aspect of causing power creep. Example: Korra starts out the series basically knowing all but one element. The premise is that the Avatar, a special person who reincarnates to bring balance to the world, however vague that mission may be, must master all 4 elements and then the Avatar state. Season 1 is focused on the last element she hasn't learned yet, air. While she does need some time on learning the element, it also gets lost in its lackluster love triangle, or is it square given the ending of the show? Anyway, TLDR, Korra learns airbending after getting her other powers taken away by the season's big bad, and then she gets the Avatar state and by extension energy bending to undo what the villain did. Now just ignoring the part where they basically undid all the consequences of the first season, especially with such a badass villain as Amon, let's get into one of the big aspects of power creep that comes from the decision that comes from, well, bad studio decisions. Namely that they were told they had 1 season, so they basically capped it off by giving her all the abilities Aang got at the end of his series. All the bending, the whole Avatar state thing, and energy bending, the ability to take away and potentially give other people bending. Problem? They got another season, so what else do they do now? They gave her everything, the big power up, the peak of her Avatar power, the Avatar state. Where do you go from there? A lackluster, horrifying season abomination. Instead of exploring what she can do with these abilities, they make up a new form of sub-bending and pull out one of their old villains, redo him but worse, give him a generic uncle usurps the throne backstory, and make the Avatar state weaker. Not surprisingly, this season is famous for dividing the Avatar fanbase in 2 and making sure it would always be divided, along with other retcons to the magic system that linger on to this day. That's not even the end of it. After a lot of shenanigans with spirits and learning the source of her powers, she loses her connection to her past lives and the spirits who give her power. Alright, they basically destroy one of the core interests of their main character, a Dalai Lama-esque figure with access to a treasure trove of world building in one fell swoop. Okay, this is painful. What else you got? Oh wow, she somehow turns into a giant blue version of herself that beats on the literal embodiment of evil while using none of the new training she got that season. Wow, so cool. No, this is not cool. This is not cool. This is a lame kaiju movie. This is just a lame kaiju movie. Why? Whose suggestion was this? Apart from being ungodly stupid and breaking the world of Avatar while being subpar at best, it makes it so that nothing matches the stakes. The next set of villains are anarchists who single-handedly destroy a nation by killing its monarch. But the last one was Super Devil, basically. The last one weaponized spiritual energy into cannon that could destroy a mountain and a giant, albeit stupid, mech that matched a skyscraper in height. it was still smaller and less of a threat than worse Satan. Not worse as in morality, but quality. But that's Season 2's villain in a nutshell. Must he be the villain though? Must he? Can we have anyone else? I will take the zombie corpse of the last guy over the pseudo devil over here. Bottom line, the show drew to destroy the world arc too early and made every villain after that with less stakes. Technically, stakes are actually determined by how much audience investment there is, and saving the world from destruction usually has low stakes because no one believes you're going to actually destroy it. The show did remedy this by giving the villains more emotional stakes afterwards. The pseudo devil was her uncle, so that could play into that too, but again, generic stole the throne arc, so no one was really that attached. And it barely ever comes up that she's kind of royalty. It never matters to the plot, really. I said matters to the plot, not hastily glued to it like a desperate hoe to a wrapper. Bottom line, power creep can apply to a story too. Saving the world from destruction is usually the final arc of a story, or a series, or a franchise, because, well, nothing can really match it. It's like giving your hero all their powers in the first half. It makes everything seem weaker in comparison. It forever damages the story and world afterward, because it made the Avatar stay less powerful while having the inner spirit bullshit that came out of nowhere, gave a sub-power that is barely ever used or mentioned, and a villain everyone was happy to retcon harder than DC does its own universe every few years. No one liked him. I probably mentioned this show's second season a lot in other videos. It has a lot of stuff that goes into never put this into your story pile. Also some general lessons on what can happen when you don't plan ahead. I have a bone to pick with a particular aspect, and we will probably talk about it when I talk about consequences in stories and Diabolus Ex Machina. Detouring back into our main topic, power creep can compound to an already tenuous story and break it apart like paper. And it can otherwise make a good story be unwatchable to some people because it breaks any sort of tension and investment. When the awesome power-up or badass weapon will be quickly replaced by a new shinier power-up or weapon. Why care if it's going to be easily replaced or retconned later? The method that I can give to remedy this is to have the protagonist earn their powers more than not, or make the fact there is a power creep a part of the story itself. True fact, I have never seen a story where the power creep is dealt with satisfactorily in a story, like in the plot itself, to people acknowledging it and having a problem with it. Like for example, the rival characters usually is allowed to keep in lockstep with the main hero. This is mostly an anime where the writer wants to maintain the illusion that there isn't a main character, but there clearly is. Looking at you, Digimon, it's always the guy with the goggles. What if your story is focused on a supporting character growing resentful of this arrangement? You know, the one where they can watch but never get to contribute. The supporting character trying to seek power to be relevant again can be a very interesting story or arc if used correctly. But this all comes back to the main issue of having power drive the story instead of the character driving it, which is always a mistake and can be an easy trap to get into. You know you did something wrong when you no longer ask, how does the character progress in this chapter, and instead ask, how does their power progress when throwing a challenge at them? I guess that killed some time for now. I'm still getting used to all this, but hey, if it means I get to keep doing what I'm doing, then I'm mostly fine with it. And this place I'm in seems nice, magical, spacious, but what am I gonna do now? I have to figure out what I can do, and that's gonna be a tricky business of trial and error. My next video can be about power and magic systems in full. What? Oh, it has come at last. If you made it all the way to here, thank you for watching the video. I hope you like and subscribe for all the effort I put into this. It actually took a long time. And as you can see, our next episode's gonna be on Attack on Titan, and specifically Eren Yeager, and how it became the story's hero to its main antagonist. Well, there's gonna be a lot of manga spoilers, but yeah, that's where it's heading. Hope you enjoy, hope you come back, and I hope to see you next time. Signing off on the Grand Archive.